And it's time for business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, the government is going to release some temporary radio spectrum. Now, this is to support the national rollout of 5G, but some people think it may not be in the best interests of the consumers?
It's because it's temporary. So let's say you just built some temporary housing for yourself and then, furnished it with custom furniture. And you put it on a block, say this block, that block, whichever one. And then in 2 years from now, you're told you're going to have to bid for a more permanent location. So you get a different block, but now your couch doesn't fit. So you need to build a new one. So that's kind of an analogy. But You're basically talking about a lot of money to build a 5G network. And you're building it for a piece of spectrum, which you're only going to have temporarily and only for 2 years. And then you're going to have to rebid for another piece of spectrum, which you'll have for a longer term. And it's a complicated reason for this. But basically, whichever which way you look at it, it's going to be the consumer who pays for all of this. Because at the end of the day, it's not the companies who benefit from this that are going to cover the cost. They're going to just pass it on to consumers. And the government, it also gets revenue because they auction the spectrum. They're going to auction it twice. They're going to auction it in this temporary step, and then they're going to auction it again. So the only real winners in this are probably the government and the telecommunication companies, but not the users. And so it remains to be seen even whether or not anyone other than Spark is going to bid for this. So there's a lot of fishhooks in it, and it's a complicated thing. And I spoke with the head of the Telecommunication Users Association, otherwise known as TUANZ, Craig Young. And he says, look, it's a temporary solution. It's not the best solution. And here's what he had to say.
So the telcos themselves are in favour of it because it gets them spectrum earlier, because the government hasn't set their long-term position. But our view is that we would rather that they did the long-term now. It shouldn't be too hard. They should be able to work it out quite quickly, how to do it, who to give it to, and how to make sure we have a competitive mobile network which works best for consumers.
And that's the Chief Executive of the Telecommunication Users Group, TUANZ, Craig Young. Now, I spoke with Craig after I spoke with him for this interview earlier today, and I'm trying to decipher all the different statements we've had. Now, none of the telecommunications companies would agree to be interviewed by us. And there's probably a good reason for that, because two of them are not at all interested in, it's hard to say whether they're interested, but I can imagine they probably aren't interested in bidding for the spectrum because it's going to be expensive. But the other reason is that Vodafone already owns a part of it. That's the reason why the government can't allocate it now, because they already have sold off part of it in 2001. And that license goes for 20 years till 2022. And that's the only time when the government can actually auction it. And they've been unable to work a deal with the telecommunication companies. Vodafone most specifically has an advantage over the others. And that's one of the reasons why they're breaking this interim step to sort of level the playing field. But in the end, it doesn't make any difference. It's going to be expensive, more expensive than it should be because of this two-step process.
Okay, you've got some of the latest data that's indicating the service sector is doing it tough leading into the holidays. What are the numbers kind of telling us?
Yeah, so we had a bit of a bounce back. So services are the kinds of things we buy and consume at the spot, like service industries, like say going to the dentist or eating at a restaurant, that kind of thing. And then there's manufacturing. That's the stuff we make and export, so to speak, and the things we consume in a different way. So goods and services, right? The latest data shows that the services sector has gone backwards. And it's gone backwards to the point where it's a contraction that's a significant one over the month before. So we went to 53.3. That's a drop of 2 points. That might not seem very much, but it's really the new orders that's seen that drop. That isn't a good story, because if we're not ordering things from the services sector, that means that their economic growth could definitely be weaker than we expected. And the BNZ, who put out this index every month, says it could actually be below 2% economic growth, which is not a good number for us.
Hey, what has been going on with the rest of the markets today?
Okay, well, look, we're down slightly, just 15 points, but this is on an uncertain environment, because even though it looks like the Chinese and the United States have done a deal on trade, there's a lot of skepticism in the market in Asia Pacific. They're not exactly sure, so there's a bit of uncertainty which way things are going to go. Until we see the detail and the ink is dry on the paper, anything is anything can happen, right?
Yep.
So we're down 15 points to 11,227. And our dollar is steady. It dropped a little bit following Brexit on Friday, but we're back up to 65.9 US cents, 95.8 Australian, and 49.2 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business update.